Well, thank you, Chess. Well, I have been your co-host here in this session today. It was really interesting to hear what everybody is doing, and I learned a lot. I got fan of a lot of people today, and I would like to be very humble to share something that we have been doing in Brazil. And we have been doing this project at Portunus. Portunus is a biotech company that was co-founded by me and two other researchers. One is American, the other is Colombian. So we have Portunus in each of those countries, Brazil, Colombia, and the US. And we started in 2017 working with CRISPR. We have been working with CRISPR ever since 2017, but we have increased our portfolio of several different projects since then. And in 2019, we started to do sequencing and work with bioinformatics and work in partnership with Genobank, which is a blockchain company for the bioinformatics and sequencing project. And this year, we have started several different projects in research and development regarding the COVID response with partners that we have here, like Fiocruz, which is Fundação Oswaldo Cruz, Mantis, etc. So particularly this one, I thought it was interesting to bring today because it's not a virus vaccine. I'm going to talk about RNA vaccines that are therapeutical vaccines. That is intended, they are intended for COVID treatment, more specifically. They are not intended, they are not the regular vaccines that you have, used for COVID. Like, for instance, they have the same principles that Moderna is using, but they are not the same. So just tell me if you can still see what you, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, because to me it's all windows are open at the same time. You can see only one open?
Yes, only one.
Okay. Oh, awesome. So everybody here probably heard about what Moderna Therapeutics is doing for COVID, which is part of a governmental program called Warp Speed. And Moderna was the only one that was funded by the government to do these vaccines that are based on messenger RNA, mRNA. And their approach is very interesting because mainly they were chosen to use that approach because the messenger RNA is able to give us a fast production, which makes a lot of sense since the pandemic demands an urgent response. But additionally, in this case, I think that what is important to highlight too is that there are other advantages on RNA. For instance, if you RNA vaccines opposed to other kinds of vaccines, you don't need to use any kind of inactivated virus. So besides, they can directly express the antigen in the cytoplasm. So that's also gives us a lot of shortcuts. And the RNA vaccines also win a lot over the DNA vaccines when you consider protein expression that has a really greater speed than DNA transfection, and they also do not depend on a promoter, and the transfections is transient, not permanent. So, but although these RNA, they are very recent, in the news, they are not so recent in the research and in the literature. Actually, RNA vaccines has been used in research for cancer ever since 1990. So ever since the 90s. In oncology, the RNA vaccines are called immunotherapy, and this focus is a therapeutic focus. So in immunotherapy, the area that is most developed is the area of personalized medicine. So my goal here today is to present the great potential of the interconnections between all of these parallel developments in R&D. So it's the interconnections between personalized medicine, between the RNA vaccines, and bioinformatics, which is mainly what we have been working through. So first of all, personalized medicine can also called sometimes stratified medicine, and also precision medicine. And it's understood that it is a medical approach that, and let me just pass the slide for you. I'm sorry. There's a lot of, I'm also keeping the chat on. So, but it's also, it's a personalized approach where you can tackle individual characteristics of the patients instead of tackle the characteristics of a whole population. So you can rely on biomarkers and you can rely on this kind of investigation that will give you a more personalized response. So we can use bioinformatic methods to identify the meaningful tumor genome features and compare the germinative DNA and the soma mutations for each individual. And then RNA sequencing from that allows identifying which of those mutations are actually expressed in the tumor. So we have, I will present to you a few steps because I had prepared a lot to talk, but I'm also taking care of the time. So what I would like to tackle here is, oh, you only have 2 minutes. Okay, so first of all, the cancer cell, the cancer mechanisms to linger inside the human body, the main one is to avoid the detection and destruction by the host immune system. So a number of strategies has been intended to interfere with the process, and they have been identified in the recent years. And one of the main ones is the upregulation of the immunosuppressive checkpoint of programmed death ligands, programmed death ligands 1 and 2. It's called PDL1 and PDL2. Also the creation of immunosuppressants and the secretion of inflammatory response, inflammatory mediators and cytokines linked to the recruitment of the myeloid-derived suppressor cells. But in this regard, like all these approaches, they have been having good results, but they are not as fast and as secure as the approach that we are proposing. We are proposing here using bioinformatics to identify meaningful tumor genome features, comparing the somatic mutations and the tumor mutations for each individual, and doing the RNA sequencing, and then later we can generate the response, the autoimmune response mediated by CRISPR. So here are the steps, because it's only 1 minute. So the first thing that we do is the biopsy. The biopsy is made in a clinic by the doctor, of course, but then we get the sample of the tumor and to do the DNA extraction of the tumor and the NGS sequence, the NGS sequencing of that, the next generation sequencing. Then we also do we collect a saliva sample of the patients and the intent of collecting the saliva sample is to have a soma DNA to compare to be able to compare the soma DNA and the germinative DNA. So we extract and sequence that DNA from the saliva sample too. And then we align and compare both with bioinformatic tools. And then we are able to compare the RNA expression of the tumor with all the available data right now for the healthy tissue and detect the differentiated gene expression, particularly for that tumor. Then we can use differential expression genome data and select finally the final list of the genes that can be modified by gene therapy in the intervention that we are doing with the therapeutic vaccine. So here's a panel that do all the steps. We have so you can have a better view of all the steps. So this is an approach that is more a process than a product, and is a process that combines all those tools that I mentioned. So it combines CRISPR, but it also combines bioinformatics, and we have all those. It also combines AI tools in order to in machine learning and also data mining in order to get those informations. And I think that that's a really good promise for those treatments. We have some treatments that are already in the market with similar principles, especially with CAR T cells Kymria is one of the successful treatments that are already in the market and targeting specifically to CAR T cells that function in similar principles. But this one was all developed with open tools. So that's why open source tools and open bio tools. So that's why I wanted to share with you here. And I think I didn't went too much over the time, although it was a lot of information and difficult to choose exactly what to present and focus. And I will be here at the end for any questions that you have, because after everybody has their time to talk.
Yes, thank
Thank
you
you a lot.
so much. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, but yes, we got to keep it moving, unfortunately. And I mean, you've been pretty active in the chat, so if people have questions, feel free to drop them. But next we will have Mia Yang, who I believe I saw her into the room. Mia, if you're ready, feel free to unmute and you can share your screen if you have some slides or however you'd like to present.
Yeah, I was planning on screen sharing and it said that the host has disabled participant screen sharing, so I'm not sure. Am I able to?
Can you help with this?
I think it's because I was still sharing, but you probably should be able to now.
Yeah, Mia, you should be all right.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's see. Is everyone able to see that? Okay.
Yep, looks good.
Great. I will go ahead and get started then. So thank you guys so much for giving me this opportunity to talk. And Isis, that was an awesome presentation. So just to give like a quick overview, I suppose I'll be talking about of the future of entrepreneurship and medicine. And I think it'll be a pretty zoomed out kind of overview of what I think are like the most, the areas that hold the most potential in entrepreneurship and medicine. And it'll be a pretty casual, less technical talk. But here's a quick outline of what I'll be going over. And just as a quick introduction to myself, so again, my name is Mia Yang. I went to the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, recently graduated. And while I was in high school, I actually co-founded this LLC called AutoVision Technologies. And at the same time, I also got involved in various biological research internships. And so that's kind of where my interest in entrepreneurship and medicine started. And so based on those experiences, I ended up applying and getting accepted into the University of Pennsylvania's Life Sciences and Management program, where I'm currently a freshman. And actually this past summer, I also worked at the Stanford Healthcare Innovation Lab in more of an intern capacity, working on translational science content. And I also most recently started working in business development at a Japanese telemedicine company. And so I've kind of dabbled in a wide variety of entrepreneurship and medicine. And today I'm really hoping to impart kind of what I think is the most potential that these areas hold. And so just really quickly as a disclaimer, this talk isn't sponsored by any of the bodies that I listed above. I'm not an expert by any means, but I do hold a lot of interest in these areas, and hopefully after my talk, everyone here will as well. And so before diving into the main content that I wanted to touch on, I wanted to introduce this concept of learning as you go. And so I think learning as you go is something that really applies to anyone, whether you're young or old. And what I define this as is really adaptability and the willingness to try new things, even if you feel unprepared. And I think in particular, this applies to entrepreneurship and medicine for reasons that I'll kind of delve into later. But I do want to quickly draw a distinction between like trying new things when you feel unprepared versus being reckless. And so I think the key here is basically being able to pinpoint when it is that you're just feeling unprepared versus when you're actually just rushing headfirst into something without thinking the consequences and things like that through. And the important part here is also being willing to commit yourself to something once you've started. And so on a macro scale, I think this whole idea of learning as you go is something that's really embodied in the Global Bio Summit, because as we've all seen through yesterday, today, We've been learning through a wide variety of sessions, such a wide variety of experts who all hold expertise in different fields, and I think that's been truly amazing to see. And on a micro scale, I think it's really important to hone this individual skill of learning as you go. And just to give a quick anecdote, so I actually, when I first started working at the Stanford Healthcare Innovation Lab, I didn't know anything about how to create translational science content, but I still really wanted to try working for the lab. And so I ended up, when I joined, I ended up picking up how to design like infographics and things like that. And that really helped bring a new level to my experience there. And then lastly, I think in COVID-19, we've seen how important adaptability is as businesses have figured out how to adapt to various restrictions caused by the pandemic. Okay, and so now applying this to entrepreneurship and medicine, first of all, why entrepreneurship and medicine? Why that combination? I would say, so life sciences and innovation is notoriously difficult, not gonna lie, and it's known to be pretty time consuming, especially if you want to get into like biotech startups and things like that. But it has historically paid off. And so what I mean by this is that oftentimes there are big breakthroughs, and when you have big breakthroughs in the life sciences area, you can impact a lot of people's lives. And just as a quick example, for example, when Merck developed the statins, they were able to help so many people with who are suffering from cardiovascular diseases. And I think entrepreneurship and medicine combined can also lead to a lot of collaboration in the public and private sector. And actually Isis kind of touched on this in her talk when she mentioned Operation Warp Speed. But I think that is a good example of how the public and private sectors can work together to really push for an important development such as a COVID-19 vaccine. And besides this, I think social entrepreneurship and nonprofit organizations also represent combinations of entrepreneurship and medicine that offer a lot of potential. And so I want to draw attention to two particular areas of medicine. So first of all, precision medicine, I think is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and it can sound pretty fancy, if you will, but ultimately what precision medicine is the customization of healthcare. Oftentimes like genomics is a key enabler of such individualized care, but precision medicine has a wide range of applications. And more, I think we're starting to see private companies starting to enter this sector. And so to give a quick overview, again, I do apologize for rushing and talking quickly, but I know we don't have too much time. And so I wanted to spotlight pharmacogenomics, which is basically testing how people respond differently to drugs. And obviously precision medicine can have a big factor in this. And another area where precision medicine is oftentimes being applied is cancer therapy. Specifically, for example, like adaptive therapy, it represents kind of an intersection of applying pharmacogenomics to cancer therapy. And then also overall population health, which can seem kind of contradictory, if you will. But actually precision medicine can play a helpful role in population health and population screening. And actually the Geisinger Health System has developed the National Precision Health Initiative, which has shown a lot of potential in terms of population screening. And then the second area that I want to spotlight is telemedicine. And so telemedicine basically leverages IT and telecommunications technology for remote diagnosis and treatment of patients. And so, for example, you might have heard headlines highlighting like teledoc and things like that more recently, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. But actually, contrary to popular belief, telemedicine is being worked on to widen application in a wide range of diseases, from like skin diseases to cancer. And also it's being used in virtual clinical trials, which I think is a really interesting application. Specifically, certain studies are using digital health apps and wearables to collect participant data remotely so that they can have like a wider cohort of patients to study. And telemedicine also affords increased accessibility to populations that otherwise struggle to receive care. And so, for example, you can use, for example, aging and rural populations, but there is a great amount of uncertainty post-COVID, whether or not, like how exactly regulation is going to go. And this, I think, varies a lot in different regions of the world, as well as the population, different populations. And I noticed something in the chat too that I can definitely elaborate on in Q&A about data security for telemedicine. That is a big issue as well. And obviously telemedicine isn't a panacea for anything, but it is an area that holds a wide amount of potential.
Hi, sorry, we just have 1 minute left.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay.
I'm wrapping up. And so in terms of what's next, I think there will be an increased blending of business and medicine. And specifically, there are, I think, opportunities for branching out from traditional biopharma clusters like Cambridge and the Bay Area and things like that. And I've also listed a couple other areas that I think hold a lot of potential: space medicine, immunotherapy, infectious diseases, obviously with COVID-19. But yeah, in conclusion, I think there are so many exciting things happening at the intersection of entrepreneurship and medicine, and collaboration and adaptability are going to become more important than ever. And so if these areas interest you at all, like they interest me, please feel free to reach out and connect on LinkedIn, and I'd love to continue our conversation there. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll hand it back to Chaz now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very exciting as we think about the future of everything, really. But I want to take as little time as I can, so I'm gonna just pass it to Tal, who I know has a very, very interesting talk that I'm very excited for.
Thank you very much. All right, let's get this going. So everyone sees this just all right?
Yes.
Perfect. So my name is Tal, and I'm going to be talking about specifically the barriers to entry for biotech as a field and DIY bio, and potentially how we can address some of these to try to make a more open environment for this community. So if you think about it, oh, sorry, a little bit about myself, first of all. So I recently left big tech, very, very happy about that, to start a startup with a few friends. Things are going really, really well so far. Really excited. And then I got my start in bio through the Real Vegan Cheese project at BioCurious. Hobbies, hiking, swimming, spending way too much time on Amazon. And you can find me at BioCurious most of the time, though lately, ongoing events. So why is the DIY bio community so small? If you think about it, it really has everything going for it, right? You get to play with cutting edge science. There's some really awesome things that you can do. There are countless resources if only you can find them. And if you pick an important project and then commit to it, you can have some really significant impacts. So the question really comes out, like, why is this community so small? And I was debating this, and I came up with a few primary reasons here. Now, this is kind of the abridged version, so there are a few others, but as far as the 80-20 relationship here, these kind of seem to dominate most of the problem. So we're going to be talking a bit more about tools, public outreach, information disarray, and industry lockout. So first of all, in the tools, so this little bit of flagrant horn tooting, I did speak about this yesterday, and there's a recording somewhere that you can find if you're so inclined. So we can move on to outreach. So DIY Biosphere put together this really interesting map where they labeled every kind of hackerspace with an emphasis on bio, or basically notable body within DIY bio in the United States. And these are just the ones they know about this, that they know about. And the thing to learn here is, if you are in a big city in the US, you do have a hackerspace available to you, which means that if you don't know about it and there's no good way to find it, then this probably means that there's not enough outreach being done. And this is where kind of you risk getting a little bit combative, but ultimately I think it's really the responsibility of us members of these spaces to make them available to as many people as possible, because they're largely catalysts towards getting as many people as possible into the field. And kind of on the combative end, if it's our responsibility, our personal responsibility, to make sure that they're available to as many people as possible, then that means that it's our responsibility to engage in outreach. even when it's inconvenient, even when we don't necessarily have something, new and exciting to show off. And I know, because we've gotten into this bucket many, many times, that's really easy to say, hey, we're gonna, get in on outreach as soon as we have something new to share, or, finish our latest project. That's not how these things tend to play out, because people aren't looking for you when you finish your latest project, they're looking for you now. And your web presence or Facebook presence or Instagram presence or Twitter, whatever you happen to use, becomes the dominant, if not sole way that new entrants to the field find the resources that they use to get involved. And if they don't find those resources, oftentimes they don't get involved. So having kind of constant, like never-ending stream of engagement, public outreach with the community is absolutely critical, and it's something that I think we all have to be thinking about. Onto information disarray. So I think this is something that we all kind of have an intuitive understanding of. There are a lot of resources out there, but the resources aren't really organized, right? This isn't like, Google, where you can just like type in what you're looking for and like a million things will pop up that are specific to your problem in DIY bio. No, in general, there are countless resources, but you mostly have to know people who are familiar with the resources or have stumbled onto them by accident in order to actually be able to use them. We don't have like a Google or a Wikipedia for a lot of these resources, and so it can get very, very difficult for new people to get involved. I don't really know a solution to this one, but we do have to have an open kind of collaborative conversation about how we better make these available. Now, as far as industry, so I think this is kind of the bulk of the issue, or at least one of the major points that really have to be tackled head on, which is, so I saw this really interesting statistic a few months ago. Apparently 70% of people with degrees in bio, undergrad degrees in bio, don't actually go on to getting a job that has anything to do with life sciences, 70%. And essentially where this is going is that there just aren't that many opportunities for people who only have an undergrad in bio, and there aren't too many opportunities overall. I actually got this quote off of study.com, which it's kind of disappointing, but absolutely right. And what they consider advanced opportunities is basically anything where you're not being a lab monkey or wandering through the woods inspecting pipelines, which is a thing you can do apparently. So you generally need a PhD in order to do anything meaningful in bio. However, in our experience, especially kind of on the startup end, where oftentimes you have to dig into interesting sources to bring on new talent, you realize that you don't really need much of this training in order to actually be able to do something useful and innovative. Oftentimes you can take people who are out of school or have an education in something different, and just like you can go through a tech boot camp and get a job at Google, it's very much possible as far as capability is concerned to be really, really productive and useful in biotech without actually having higher degrees or degrees at all. And yet this is very much disconnected from the way that industry tends to view this. And so overall, I think that, if we want to expand the DIY biosphere and kind of the field as a whole, we really, really need to think about the relationship between DIY bio and industry. And if DIY bio is to thrive, then this relationship has to change, especially when it comes to opportunities within the industry. It's ultimately a lot of these pseudo industry hobbies that people have, whether it's like programming or, who knows what, emerge because there's, ultimately there's a big difference between a hobby that you do for fun and something that can actually, pay for your food. And closing that gap has become a big obstacle towards bringing more people into this community, especially because we haven't always had the best relationship between DIY bio and industry, though it's a very large community and we have a lot of people with a lot of voices. So this is definitely not a universal thing. But if we want to grow our community, we really have to get a little bit more of a synergy thing going. Because ultimately, the size and strength of our community is really the thing that matters the most. And if that's what we're optimizing for, then we, I think that this stuff it's not a thought to think, it's kind of a moral imperative, at least as far as I see it. So thank you very much for listening. I've been Tal Globus. This is some contact info for me. A little warning about the website is I'm constantly taking it up and putting it down as I kind of update it for the 21st century. So don't expect that to work 100% of the time. LinkedIn's pretty good though, if I ever get around to putting the super secret stealth startup on there. So thank you guys very much for listening, and I guess we'll open this up for questions.
Yeah, Tal, thank you so much. And can we just give a round of applause to all of our speakers? That was incredible. And Tal, I was ready for like a 30-minute talk and you somehow managed to fit it all in. Um, but yeah, are there any questions? I think all of the participants should be able to unmute if they have any questions for our three speakers. And if not, I can ask a question. So Tal, what do you think, how do we fix this kind of relationship between the DIY bio and the industry? Like, I agree that there is this weird relationship between the two. And I can see why having a good relationship can actually increase the community size. So how do you think we might go about fixing that relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the sense that I've gotten, now granted, this got a strong bias just based on, the parts of the industry that I've been exposed to, kind of the startup world. But it seems like younger, less established companies are much, much more willing to consider new sources of talent. We definitely are, and a lot of the other groups that we've spoken to are. And what seems to happen in a lot of these areas, like what happened in tech, was largely that you had newer, younger companies that were willing to consider, non-degreed folks or people with different experience, and that kind of, propagated up to higher industry. And so that's what we see as probably the most likely to solve this, is if we see kind of all the new startups in bio being more open and, hopefully that propagating over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I do think we're starting to see that. But yeah, it's just, I guess we shall see as things progress. Are there any other questions out there? And we have about 7 minutes before our last session of this track. Oh, and Kevin has some questions. Kevin, would you mind unmuting and asking?
Yeah, sure. I can ask a million questions. Just challenge me. First one was kind of for Tal and maybe for Mia as well. Where like, are you seeing key examples of contributions to industry from our community or from like maybe like lesser trained or more citizen kind of oriented people? I mean, I only have a bachelor's degree, but I started a company anyways, and so I'm kind of maybe on that track a little bit too. Wondering if there's anything else, is there anything that stands out to you guys that we've seen already?
So here, I'll jump in first, and then we'll give Mia some time as well. Limited, definitely limited. Most of the big innovations seem to come from people who, again, given my startup bias here, go and actually start a company and then kind of release their innovations that way. Propagating up the chain into like a large established, like, a pharma company or something doesn't happen nearly as much. But there are now some conversations happening about putting together better connections between academia and industry, because academia has a lot of innovations that have really struggled to break into industry. It seems like a lot of those resources and conversations that are happening about that could very easily be extended to include kind of DIY as well. And so that's what I'm personally hoping for, though, time will tell, I suppose. Mia?
Yeah, sure. Adding on to Tal. So actually over the summer, there was this one nonprofit organization I worked with that was basically working on rare diseases, but collecting data. It was basically like bringing together a bunch of scientists to one event to work on one specific individual's rare disease. And the unique thing about this organization was actually the founder himself didn't have necessarily too much experience in the industry, but he had a personal friend who was dealing with a rare disease, and from there was able to reach out and use a bunch of resources to actually start up this organization. And I do think more and more, as you said, Kevin, there will be other examples of contributions to the industry coming from outside the industry. And I think actually precision medicine and population health also represent perfect examples of this, because really anyone can contribute their data so long as they're willing to and they want to, and of course proper security measures are taken, but more and more I do think we are going to see contributions from outside the industry.
Wow, thank you so much for the question and answer. We also had another question that I saw in the chat. Catherine, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
I think there was also a question for Isis, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Kevin or Catherine.
So Catherine, I just asked that question, so come back to me, but Catherine can go first.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask if you dig into the topic of data security in the field of telemedicine and everything related. And if yes, what have been your experiences with that in the US? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so I don't have expertise in data security in the field of telemedicine, but I did dig into it a little bit more from the perspective of like the public. And just to give a little bit of context, so I was working on a certain article for the lab I was working at, and basically it was concerning how people perceive data security with telemedicine. And I honestly, I think there is still a great amount of distrust in the US population in regards to telemedicine, and also actually in terms of contact tracing, which was actually a pretty big deal earlier in the pandemic. And I think it'll be really interesting I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out post-COVID, because I think for a lot of people right now, their priority is being able to just use contact tracing, for example. Their priority right now is obviously to limit the spread of COVID. And so a lot of people are fixated on that. But once the threat of the pandemic perhaps has faded a little more, people are going to start to question data security and just how much their data is being protected. And again, it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out amongst regulatory bodies versus the private sector.
I think in that sense, if I may add, we have been doing like a work specifically with genome sequencing that wrap it up both questions, because it comes from the community to the industry first. We have been following, of course, because of all the relationships we have within the community here, all the scandals that happened like in 2018 with companies like 23andMe and My Ancestry, etc., where all that data has been leaked or sold or have been, demanded by judges, etc. And in Brazil, we of course did for a long time the sequencing for Ancestry, but we didn't have just one particular company that was only doing that. That were several different other companies that did all kinds of sequencing. And so we saw an opportunity to instill that discussion when it's still in the beginning. And then we started this campaign called Cores do Brasil, which is Colors of Brazil in English. And in this campaign, what we did was, it was a beta campaign last year. We partnered with genobank.io here, and we sequenced all the information, all the DNA information for ancestrality. And then everything was uploaded to the blockchain with Genobank, and none of the raw data stays with us. The raw data is for the user. So if the user wants to later monetize that, if the user wants to erase that completely, if the user, wants to give part of that information to a doctor or a health insurance plan, or even to another company to do other kinds of gene panels. We do a lot of gene panels on demand. So that's his choice. So I think that giving back the choice to the owner of the biological information, or to the patients in the case of telemedicine, it's very important. And blockchain gives, it's a way. It's not the only way, but it's a way to do that in data security.
Yeah, not a very energetic, efficient way, but it's a way to...
I had a really quick question, if that's all right, to Tal. Oh, are we out of time?
We are out of time, but Chaz, what's... What's your 411? Oh, you're not a co-host. I just asked you to unmute.
Sorry. Yes, please ask the question very quickly, and then we will have to move on. But
Yeah,
thank you, Mia and Tal.
Okay, yeah, I just had a question for Tal about how like small labs or like small startup companies, how risky is publicizing your ideas and getting it like sniped by like a larger lab or a larger company, and sort of taking an idea and just running with it, and or making a new publication out of it just because they have more resources?
I mean, it's not really a specific question to bio. That's a problem for every startup, right? And ultimately, it seems to just come down to what's the risk and what's the reward. And I wish that I had a better rule of thumb than that. But who are you sharing it with? Why are you sharing it? And are you giving away information that could potentially be at risk? Also, how easy is it to reproduce what you're doing? And so we ended up just kind of tallying all these things up ourselves and coming to a risk level that we feel pretty confident with. And this is just kind of something that every startup, every small lab has to kind of do on their own.
Thank you, speakers, Tal, Mia, Isis. Thank you so much. It was incredible. Nini, everyone who's was able to give a lightning talk today. Now I'm going to pass it over to Isis again to lead the way into our final discussion of the Open Innovation Track, one again that I'm very excited for.